Kendra Holloway was coding alone at 2 a.m., not for a grade, but to expose the racism baked into America's justice system. Then Harvard's most powerful dean walked in, mistook her for an intruder, and demanded to see her screen. What he saw nearly brought him to his knees. A revolutionary AI that proved racial bias wasn't just real, it was predictable. But instead of support, he gave her a warning. Don't show this to anyone. She didn't listen, and what happened next shook the Ivy League to its core. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The echo of Kendra Holloway's keystrokes was the only sound breathing through the architecture of Harvard's oldest academic building. The night had emptied the corridors of chatter and footsteps, leaving only shadows cast long by antique lamps flickering against oak-paneled walls. Outside, the trees bowed under November's breath, the world asleep. But here, in a forgotten corner of the science and engineering lab, 17-year-old Kendra chased something few dared believe she could ever hold: recognition. The glow of her laptop was the only light in the room, softly reflecting off her round glasses. Her hair was tied up in a thick bun, and her hoodie bore the logo of a public high school no one at Harvard had heard of. Most nights, she didn't mind being invisible. It made it easier to move in a place that wasn't designed for her to belong. Kendra's fingers darted across the keyboard, pouring lines of code into a neural network she had been building for 6 months. It was a machine learning project designed to analyze and predict the racial bias in law enforcement decisions. Her goal was simple: make the system see what people refused to. She didn't have a grant. She didn't have a lab supervisor. She had late nights, stolen access codes, and an unshakable belief that this mattered. Harvard hadn't given her permission, but it had given her proximity. That was enough. She adjusted her headphones, filtering in the slow jazz that helped her concentrate, and let herself slip into the rhythm. Hours passed this way. Time became abstract. She wasn't tired. Not yet. Her work, her purpose refused to let her rest. She had submitted versions of this project to faculty before, but they never made it past the first round of review. Ambitious but flawed, they said. Inappropriate scope your experience level. The real message: this kind of brilliance isn't expected from you. Tonight she would finish the final iteration. Her model was finally stable. The datasets had been cleaned, the training complete. She just needed to run one last simulation. As the progress bar crept across her screen, she leaned back and took a breath. And that's when she felt it. The present. A flicker of movement in the reflection of her screen. A breath not her own. She turned slowly, her heartbeat hitching for reasons her mind hadn't caught up with yet. And there he was, Dean Jonathan Thorne. In his tailored wool coat and polished Oxfords, he looked like a relic of Harvard's golden age. White-haired, stern-eyed, the embodiment of old-world prestige. He stood silently in the doorway, arms folded, face unreadable. Kendra blinked, instinctively minimizing her code window. Her hands trembled slightly, though she didn't understand why. She hadn't broken in. She had her ID. She belonged here. Didn't she? He stepped forward, each footstep echoing like a gavel against the marble floor. "Miss," he said, voice low but sharp, "you're not authorized to be here this late." She hesitated. "I'm a student, Kendra Holloway. I have 24-hour lab access." His eyes narrowed. "This wing is reserved for doctoral researchers after 10 p.m. Kendra swallowed, pulling up her student ID. "I didn't know. I'm working on my senior research project." "Under whose supervision?" The question pierced her. She had no supervisor. Every professor she'd approached had brushed her off with patronizing encouragements and departmental jargon that meant no. She opened her mouth to explain, but nothing she could say would sound legitimate enough. Thorne took another step closer, glancing at the screen she had minimized. He paused. "Open that." Her fingers hesitated above the trackpad. "Now." She obeyed. Lines of code filled the screen, followed by a dataset dashboard and predictive graph. Thorne's eyes scanned the interface. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition? Surprise? It vanished before she could name it. "Who gave you this data?" he asked. "It's publicly sourced," she answered. "Freedom of Information Act. I built scrapers for court records, police logs, and community surveys." He said nothing. The air thickened. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. Kendra stared, confused. But just before leaving, he stopped, his back still turned. Don't show this to anyone. And he walked out, his footsteps fading into the silent halls. Kendra was no longer alone. Dean Thorne, Harvard's most powerful academic, appears behind her unnoticed. Dean Jonathan Thorne's footsteps echoed faintly as he turned back toward the lab, his polished shoes clicking like punctuation marks in the silence. The air between him and Kendra was heavy, tense, a collision of generations, of privilege and persistence, of authority and doubt. Kendra's chest tightened as she watched his silhouette linger in the doorway. He hadn't left. Not really. He was assessing her not as a student but as an anomaly. Thorne's gaze swept across the room, the empty desks, the scattered notebooks, the dim monitor light that haloed Kendra's face. Everything about her presence here seemed to irritate his order of things. You said your name was Holloway, he asked finally. His tone clipped, as though confirming the presence of an error in his system. Yes, sir. Kendra Holloway. I'm a first-year undergrad. Her voice wavered, but she steadied it with practiced calm. This wasn't the first time she'd had to justify her existence in a space that questioned it. He folded his arms. First year? In this building? This is restricted to graduate-level researchers after hours. Who approved your access? Kendra reached for her backpack and pulled out her student ID card, the laminated plastic catching the sterile light. I applied for extended access through the department. I got an email confirmation from facilities. Thorne took the card, holding it with the faint distaste of someone inspecting a counterfeit bill. His thumb brushed over the name and the student photo. Facilities, he repeated, as though the word itself offended him. Access to this lab requires departmental endorsement, not administrative. Her stomach sank. She knew the difference. She also knew that when she had asked for departmental access, her request had been misplaced twice. The only door left open had been through facilities. She had learned to survive on loopholes, the kind no one ever noticed until a black girl used them. I'm not breaking any rule, she said quietly. Thorne's brows lifted. You're certainly bending several. He returned the card, his eyes never leaving hers. In those cold gray pupils was something that felt like calculation, a quiet sorting of who she was and where she belonged. Do you realize how serious this could be if you're found here without authorization? I'm not without authorization, she replied, her voice sharper now, defiance creeping in against her will. I've been working here for weeks. Nobody said anything before. Perhaps no one noticed, Thorne said dryly. That's the thing about rules. They only matter when someone does. The words stung. He was calm, courteous, articulate, but underneath the tone she could feel it. The subtle suspicion, the unspoken "you don't belong here." Every syllable was wrapped in the language of professionalism, but it hit like accusation. Kendra inhaled slowly, willing her pulse to settle. I'm working on something important, Dean Thorne. It's for my data science proposal. His eyes narrowed at the word proposal. Under whose advisement? Again, the silence, the one that always betrayed her position, mentorless, unsupported, but not talentless. She had reached out to professors before. They'd praised her enthusiasm, but deflected her collaboration requests. Most didn't have the bandwidth. Some didn't have the imagination. I'm independent, she said finally. But it's real research. I can show you. Thorne's lips pressed into a thin line. Independent research at your level is ambitious. His tone softened slightly, but not in kindness. It was the kind of softness reserved for condescension. Miss Holloway, this is Harvard. Standards are high for a reason. I know that. He circled the desk, glancing at her laptop, still open to the coding interface she'd been working in before he startled her. His gaze landed on the complex algorithms, sequences and variable strings even seasoned graduate students might struggle to parse. This isn't undergraduate material, he said slowly. Who helped you write this? Kendra's spine straightened. No one. He looked up sharply. No one? I taught myself. I took advanced courses online before I came here. I've been building this project for months. His expression didn't change. If anything, disbelief hardened into something quieter, more insidious. That brand of skepticism, reserved for people who didn't fit the profile of genius. Self-taught, he murmured, as if trying the phrase on his tongue. That's commendable, but dangerous. If you're playing with data you don't fully understand. Kendra met his gaze. With respect, Dean Thorne, I understand it perfectly. What I'm building could identify systemic racial bias in law enforcement records. It's accurate to over 92% predictive reliability. I've tested it. The words left her lips with conviction, and fear. Because saying them out loud meant inviting scrutiny. It meant daring someone like him to see her not just as a student, but as a challenger to everything the institution quietly protected. Thorne stepped back, studying her as though she had just spoken a foreign language. Racial bias, he repeated, and something subtle tightened in his jaw. That's a rather loaded topic for a student project. It's data, Kendra said. Numbers don't have an agenda. His chuckle was short, almost imperceptible. Numbers never do, Miss Holloway. People, however, always do. She caught it then. The shift from doubt to dismissal. He wasn't just questioning her credentials. He was questioning her motive. To him, her brilliance wasn't brilliance. It was defiance dressed as intellect. Kendra's throat burned. She wanted to defend herself, to explain how many nights she had stayed awake, cleaning datasets, writing Python scripts, reading through outdated academic journals that ignored the intersection of race and tech. But the words tangled in her chest. She knew the cost of being too assertive. Thorne glanced around once more, then at the clock on the wall. It's 2:30 in the morning. You should be in your dorm, not attempting doctoral-level analytics. I'm not doing this for grades, she said. I'm doing it because it matters. He looked at her again. Truly looked this time. But whatever he saw, it wasn't enough to bridge the gulf between their worlds. His authority, his caution, his unconscious prejudice, it all merged into one chilling certainty. She would never be allowed to be enough. Thorne sighed and took a step toward the exit. Miss Holloway, I suggest you shut this down before someone else finds you here. For your own sake. I'm not doing anything wrong, she said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. He stopped at the door, turning slightly. His expression softened for the first time, not out of empathy, but out of finality. Sometimes wrong doesn't need to be illegal to be unwise. He started to leave again. The silence of the lab swallowed her, thick with humiliation and anger she refused to show. She looked at the door, at the shadow of the man who represented every institutional gate she had fought to pass. Something inside her snapped, not in rage, but in resolve. Dean Thorne, she said, her voice steady now. He paused. Would you like to see what I'm working on? He turned slowly, wary, as if unsure whether she was challenging him or inviting him. Her fingers moved to her laptop. The screen came alive again, filled with the cascade of her algorithm. Clean, elegant, impossible to fake. This is the system I've built, she said. It identifies racial bias patterns across 10 years of federal policing data. And it works. Thorne's eyes narrowed, then widened. A rare crack in his composure, the kind that revealed both awe and fear. He stepped closer, his gaze scanning the real-time results on the screen. The data visualizations pulsed like a living thing, irrefutable, undeniable, and dangerous. Kendra didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched him watch her world unravel his. Kendra opens her laptop and shows him her project, and his eyes widen. The glow from Kendra's laptop bathed the entire lab in a faint blue light, flickering across the steel countertops and the glass walls that separated her from the empty corridors beyond. Dean Thorne leaned closer, his breath catching as the algorithm rendered its output, a dynamic heat map of racial bias across U.S. counties. The screen pulsed softly, highlighting data clusters that exposed an uncomfortable truth. Where money and power concentrated, justice had quietly disappeared. For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sounds were the low hum of the machines and the faint whir of the air vent above them. Kendra stood a few feet away, watching him study her work, her palms pressed tightly against her thighs. She could feel her heart drumming in her chest. This, Thorne began slowly, eyes never leaving the screen. This isn't possible. Kendra swallowed. It is, she said softly. I built it from public data. Police reports, sentencing records, federal case files. It predicts racial disparities in future policies before they're enacted. He turned his head toward her, disbelief etched in the lines around his mouth. You're telling me this machine can forecast bias? It doesn't forecast people, she explained carefully. It forecasts behavior patterns. When bias repeats, the system learns to anticipate where it will appear next. Thorne stepped back, rubbing his temples. Miss Holloway, this sort of work, he trailed off, searching for a diplomatic word, something that would disguise the alarm flickering behind his professional mask, is controversial. Kendra tilted her chin up. Truth usually is. For the first time he looked at her, really looked. not as a student who had overstepped, but as someone holding something that might upend the very foundations of the institution he protected. Her project wasn't merely academic. It was an indictment, one written in logic and numbers so precise that no opinion could refute it. Thorne turned back to the monitor. He scrolled through the visualizations, each graph stabbing at the reputation Harvard had built on being the center of enlightened thought. The data showed favoritism in judicial decisions, police funding skewed toward white majority neighborhoods, education disparities buried under policy jargon. Every pixel of Kendra's model screamed the same message: the system knows what it's doing. "How long have you been working on this?" he asked finally. "Since my sophomore year in high school," she said quietly. "I didn't have equipment back then, so I coded it on my phone. I taught myself Python from YouTube. I started training the model using free public datasets. I've been refining it ever since." Thorne's brows knit together. "And you did all of this alone?" "No one would help me," she said, the words carrying both pride and exhaustion. "Not here. Not before. Every time I asked for mentorship, they redirected me to someone more appropriate for my level. I stopped asking." He exhaled slowly, the sound measured but tense. "You're talented, no doubt, but Harvard has procedures for a reason. Data ethics, approval boards, legal review. These things exist to prevent misunderstandings." Kendra's jaw tightened. "Misunderstandings," she echoed. "Like being accused of stealing ideas I created because they're too advanced for someone like me." The words landed heavy between them. Thorne's silence was its own confession. He didn't correct her. He didn't deny that such assumptions existed. Instead, he turned to the data again, as though hoping the numbers would swallow the conversation whole. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked finally, his tone now lower, almost careful. "I do," Kendra said. "It means we can prove systemic bias isn't opinion. It's measurable. It means you can't just say racism is invisible anymore. The numbers make it visible." He looked at her as though she had said something dangerous. "Not wrong, but too right. You're playing with fire," he said. "If you publish this, the political fallout will be real," she interrupted. "That's the point." Thorne's expression hardened. "Miss Holloway, Harvard has a duty to remain apolitical. What you're suggesting could be seen as truthful, provocative," he corrected sharply. "Reckless even. Data can be twisted, misinterpreted, especially when handled by someone without institutional oversight." She laughed. But it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. "So, if I were a grad student under the right professor, this would be revolutionary. But since I'm an undergrad who happens to be black, it's reckless." The dean's lips pressed together. For a fraction of a second, his composure cracked. He didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Kendra turned the screen toward him. "Dean Thorne, you said Harvard has procedures, but those procedures were built to keep students like me from ever getting here. You think I don't know that? Every lab, every mentor, every approval form, there's always a no waiting for me. So I stopped asking for permission." Thorne's eyes flicked toward the hallway, as if the walls themselves might be listening. His voice softened, but the authority in it didn't waver. "I'm warning you because I've seen what happens when people challenge this place before they're ready. Harvard doesn't forgive easily." Kendra stared at him. "Then maybe Harvard should start learning how to." The words hung between them, quiet, defiant, dangerous. He looked back at the data one more time. Each algorithm pulsed with unfiltered accuracy, revealing patterns that no one wanted exposed. He scrolled further down until a particular section caught his eye. A correlation map linking university endowments to demographic exclusions in student grant approvals. His hand froze on the mouse. "Where did you get this dataset?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "It's from the Department of Education's public access files," she said. "I cleaned it up, cross-referenced it with university archives." His eyes darted to her. "Archives? Which archives?" "The ones on Harvard's open server." He blinked. "That server isn't..." He stopped himself. Kendra frowned. "Isn't what?" "Nothing." He stepped back, visibly unsettled now. "You've done enough for tonight." But Kendra wasn't finished. She clicked another tab. "There's more." A second window opened, revealing a beta model labeled Project Lucent. On the screen appeared a real-time policy predictor, a prototype that simulated how proposed legislation would statistically disadvantage marginalized groups before it even passed. Thorne's jaw tightened as the simulation highlighted decades of bias embedded in state and federal decisions. This could bring down institutions. he muttered under his breath. Or rebuild them, she said. He turned sharply toward her. Do you have any idea what you're dealing with? If the public gets wind of this, it won't just be about your algorithm. It'll be about us. About Harvard. Every donor, every board member, every name on those buildings will start asking questions that can't be answered politely. I didn't build it to destroy anyone, Kendra said. I built it to make the system honest. Systems aren't honest, Thorne said flatly. They're self-preserving. And this will make them feel threatened. The faint buzz of her computer filled the silence that followed. Outside, the wind scraped against the old glass windows. The sound eerie and cold. For the first time, Kendra saw it. Not fear of her, but fear for the institution. Thorne's loyalty wasn't to truth or knowledge, but to the preservation of the place that had crowned him powerful. She closed the laptop softly. You saw it. You know what it can do. Why are you afraid of it? Thorne's voice was barely a whisper. Because you don't know what they'll do to stop it. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. His hand hovered over the light switch. Don't show this to anyone, he said finally, his tone clipped, almost pleading. Not your peers, not your professors, not even your friends. Kendra stared at him, her face unreadable. Why? Because if you do, he said, it won't be your work they come for. And before she could reply, he flicked the switch, plunging the room into darkness. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone again. Her laptop's faint blue glow still pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. He tells her not to show this to anyone, and quickly leaves the room. The sun had not yet broken through the dense Cambridge clouds when the first email landed in a faculty inbox. A simple message, forwarded from an internal server log, flagged late-night computer lab access by an undergraduate, unauthorized, unsupervised, and highly unusual. Within an hour, a quiet ripple began to move through Harvard's academic bloodstream. Not about the code, not about the predictive model, not about the breakthrough in machine learning, but about Kendra Holloway, and more specifically what she was doing somewhere she supposedly didn't belong. By breakfast, the whispers were already circulating in faculty lounges and department hallways. Did you hear? Some undergrad accessed the graduate lab without approval. She used internal servers for unsanctioned research. The words unauthorized, unsupervised, independent clung to her name like warning labels. No one was discussing what she had created. Only that she had created it alone. Kendra walked through the yard that morning like a ghost inside her own story. The same faces that once smiled politely, now turned with curiosity, or worse, calculation. She felt it immediately. The change in the air, the sideways glances, the sudden hush when she passed. Something invisible had wrapped itself around her. Not danger, but scrutiny. It wasn't her genius they were intrigued by. It was her audacity. In the dining hall, two upperclassmen from the applied mathematics program paused their conversation as she entered. One of them whispered, not softly enough, "That's her. The freshman who hacked the system or something." The other frowned. "I heard it was plagiarism. She copied some grad student's thesis and tried to repackage it as AI. She's lucky they haven't kicked her out." Kendra kept walking, her tray untouched. The food was irrelevant. So was their noise. But inside, something twisted. Back in her dorm, the silence was worse. Her roommate, a social science major who had once asked to borrow one of Kendra's Python scripts for her data viz class, now barely looked up from her laptop. When Kendra asked if anything was wrong, the girl offered a tight-lipped smile and said, "Just trying to stay out of things." Out of things? That same morning, Kendra received a campus alert. A formal summons to the Office of Academic Integrity. The subject line was cold, clinical. Meeting required, review of independent work. It hit her like ice water. She stood frozen in front of her email, her mind spinning with questions that didn't need answers. She knew what this was. She had seen it play out for others, though rarely at this level. When the system couldn't discredit your intelligence, it questioned your legitimacy. When Kendra arrived at the administrative building later that day, she was met by a secretary who offered her a clipboard without eye contact. "Sign in," the woman said. "They'll call you shortly." Kendra sat in a waiting area, decorated with awards and smiling portraits of faculty. No student photos adorned the walls, no trace of youth, just prestige. After 10 minutes, a woman in a navy suit appeared at the doorway. "Miss Holloway? Follow me, please." She was led into a conference room with 4 faculty members seated behind a curved table. 2 men, 2 women, all white. Each had a folder in front of them, some already open. There were no introductions, no handshakes. A man with thinning hair and an economics department pin on his lapel spoke first. Miss Holloway, you've been called here due to concerns regarding unauthorized use of Harvard computing resources, access to restricted servers, and possible breaches of academic policy. Kendra inhaled deeply, steadying her voice. I had 24-hour lab access. I didn't bypass any system. One of the women from the computer science division looked up. The system you were developing, who advised your project? No one, Kendra answered. I developed it independently. The room shifted. Papers rustled. The subtle sound of disbelief passed between them. The second man leaned forward, steepling his fingers. You expect us to believe that an undergraduate, a first year, built a predictive algorithm of that complexity without assistance? Yes. The pause that followed felt endless. It mirrors work currently being developed by a doctoral candidate in the public policy program, the first woman said coolly. You are aware of that, aren't you? Kendra blinked. No, I've never seen anyone else's work. This is mine. They didn't nod. They didn't confirm. They just wrote something down. Racism rarely looked like slurs at Harvard. It wore tweed jackets, wielded policy documents, and arrived with polite skepticism. In this room, Kendra's intelligence wasn't impossible, just improbable, and improbability, when tied to blackness, became suspicion. The final faculty member, who hadn't yet spoken, cleared her throat. Miss Holloway, we aren't here to accuse, we're here to verify. If your work is as original as you claim, we'll need to examine it, full. Kendra's voice didn't falter. You can review every line of code. Every dataset was sourced through public channels. I documented everything. Another scribble of notes. Another exchange of glances. We will be placing your project under formal review for academic misconduct, the woman said. You'll receive written notification within 24 hours. Until then, you are asked not to share or present your work further. Kendra sat still, her pulse hammering, her hands clenched in her lap. So I'm being accused of misconduct before you've even reviewed it. It's protocol, the man replied. You understand?
No.
She didn't, and she wasn't supposed to. Outside the office, the November wind felt colder than she remembered. Her coat did little to block it. And yet the chill she felt wasn't from the weather. It was from the way the institution had pivoted away from celebrating her, toward containing her. By the time she returned to her dorm, a yellow envelope had been slipped under her door. Her name was typed on the front in block letters. She picked it up with trembling hands and opened it slowly. Inside was a formal notice stamped with the university seal. Notice of review, allegation of academic misconduct. She read it once. Then again. The final paragraph made her stomach drop. Your project, titled BiasNet Predictive Models of Systemic Injustice, is now subject to departmental investigation. All digital materials and communications related to the project must be preserved for inquiry. Further dissemination may result in disciplinary action. She sat on the edge of her bed, the letter trembling in her hands. They weren't trying to understand her work. They were trying to erase it. Kendra receives a notice. Her project will be reviewed for academic misconduct. The letter from the disciplinary board stayed folded in Kendra's bag like a threat she refused to read again. But its message echoed through every space she moved in. You don't belong here unless we say you do. The morning after her summons, she walked into the campus tech lab like a shadow, pretending to be solid. She kept her head low, her face calm, her hands steady, but beneath that surface was a storm. Anger, fear, and something deeper. Betrayal. She passed through rows of white students huddled in groups, laughing over coffee, comparing code snippets, discussing grant meetings she hadn't been invited to. It wasn't just that she had been excluded, it was that no one even questioned her absence. By now the whispers about her were everywhere. But instead of defending herself with words, Kendra chose something more dangerous, silence laced with intent. That day, she began watching. And what she saw shattered whatever illusion she still had about fairness at Harvard. In the back row of the AI lab, two seniors were running Ethereum miners on school servers, using university electricity to power their startup. Everyone knew. They didn't even bother hiding it. Their monitors flashed blockchain graphs, and their laughter echoed off the lab walls. The lab manager walked past them twice, said nothing, and even complimented one on his ambition. In the adjacent lab, a blonde economics major, the daughter of a state senator, regularly used Harvard's data servers to test her father's re-election algorithms. When she tripped the network capacity and crashed the student VPN for a full 30 minutes, it was called a technical hiccup. Her disciplinary meeting ended with a coffee and a networking opportunity with a faculty member. Kendra started keeping notes. She logged every incident, every privilege casually exercised. She took screenshots. She quietly installed a keylogger script. Nothing invasive, just metadata: who logged in, when, for how long, and on which machine. And what she uncovered felt like peeling back skin from bone. There were 10 documented cases of students violating lab access protocols. 7 were white. All had either received a warning or were let off with a smile and a promise of future greatness. Not one had been written up. Not one had been publicly questioned. Most had glowing recommendations posted to internal faculty boards. Meanwhile, Kendra's independent academic work, conducted during approved hours, using public data, with original code, was under investigation for misconduct. She scrolled through archived server logs late one night and found a file labeled Access Temp 94. Buried inside were lists of approved lab users and a secondary list of informal exceptions. Students who'd been pre-cleared by faculty for late-night access. She searched for her name. It wasn't there, but she recognized others. One in particular stood out: Declan Parrish, the student who crashed the servers 3 weeks earlier. Her hands froze over the keyboard. Declan was a legacy student. His father had donated a wing to the School of Engineering. He was notorious for pushing boundaries and flaunting the lack of consequences. And there it was, a literal digital record of his informal exemption. Kendra leaned back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't negligence. It was structure. The university had built an invisible shield around certain students, a kind of academic white glove treatment that made their failures invisible and their brilliance assumed. She wasn't just fighting to prove she belonged. She was fighting against a system designed to erase her before she ever arrived. Later that week, she attended a required seminar on research ethics. Irony not lost on her. The class was led by Dr. Merrill Klein, a tenured professor in machine learning. During the Q&A, Kendra raised her hand. "Professor," she asked, voice steady, "what's the university's official process for reviewing lab access violations?" Dr. Klein blinked, caught off guard. "Well, we have a tiered protocol. Most cases don't escalate unless there's damage or repeated offense." Kendra nodded. "So if a student crashed the server network, would that qualify as an offense?" The room fell quiet. Dr. Klein looked uncomfortable. "That would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis." "Is it reviewed if the student's father funds a department building?" The silence turned thick. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Dr. Klein said sharply. "I'm not implying anything," Kendra replied, then lowered her hand. "Just asking about consistency." She didn't push further. She didn't need to. The seed had been planted, and the room had felt it. That night, she returned to her dorm with her mind still racing. Her fingertips tingled with the weight of everything she had seen. Not just unfairness, but intentionality. She hadn't expected fairness, but she hadn't expected the precision of the injustice either. She opened her laptop and went back to her digital archive. Something bothered her, not just the server logs, but the way her project funding had been handled. She had applied for 3 different research grants since arriving at Harvard. Each time, the result had been the same. "Unfortunately, we regret to inform you." It hadn't felt odd at first. Harvard was competitive. Not everyone got funded. But now she wondered. She logged into the internal portal using her student credentials and scanned the list of last semester's grant recipients. 2 of her own suite mates had received partial awards, both for projects far less technically ambitious. One had built a mood tracker app using pre-built frameworks. Another had designed a website for local pet adoptions. Her project, a fully operational AI platform using national datasets, hadn't even made it to shortlisting. She dug deeper. Using her metadata scripts, she traced faculty email threads that mentioned her name. She wasn't supposed to see these. They weren't meant for students. But the university's network had its vulnerabilities, and Kendra had learned them well. One thread stood out. Subject line: Why us, Holloway. Grant application review. Sender: Professor Denning. Faculty coordinator. Recipient: Committee group. The message was short. She's talented, but the scope is a red flag. No supervision. Suggest we quietly pass. Don't want to encourage the wrong precedent. Kendra's chest tightened. The wrong precedent. Another email from a week later, written by someone in the Office of Undergraduate Research. There's concern over optics if we fund a solo freshman doing controversial policy-based AI work, especially when our core narrative focuses on faculty-guided innovation. Better to stay clear. Kendra stared at the screen. This wasn't rejection. This was deliberate exclusion. They weren't trying to protect her. They were protecting their brand. Harvard's prestige had room for Black excellence, but only if it could be curated, managed, and molded into something palatable. What she had built was raw, unfiltered, and powerful. It wasn't that she had bypassed the system. It was that she had proven she didn't need it. She copied the emails to an encrypted folder. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Not this time. The sadness had calcified into something else now. Not bitterness, but strategy. She would not be their secret. She would not be their buried brilliance. And they would not get away with this in silence. She uncovers emails showing faculty deliberately blocking her funding applications. The weight of the printed emails sat heavy in Kendra's bag like contraband. Evidence of something everyone knew but never named. A system designed to smile in your face while pulling the floor from under your feet. But Kendra wasn't done. Not yet. She still believed, or wanted to believe, that there were people on this campus who would stand beside her. She'd seen their panels, read their essays, watched them clap the loudest during equity forums. They called themselves allies. It was time to find out if that word meant anything. She started with Professor Linda Crane, a tenured sociologist who'd built her reputation on racial justice theory and published a book titled Structures of Silence: How Institutions Fail Black Voices. Kendra had taken her introductory course in the fall. Professor Crane had quoted James Baldwin and Kimberlé Crenshaw in every lecture. During office hours, she often told students to use their voices and disrupt respectfully. So when Kendra sent an email asking for a meeting, she didn't expect to wait 4 days for a response. And when the reply finally came, it was clipped and clinical. Happy to chat briefly. 15 minutes between faculty meetings. Please keep it concise. Kendra arrived at Crane's office with a printed copy of her model summary and a short description of the email she had uncovered. She didn't want to accuse, she just wanted someone, anyone, to acknowledge what was happening. Crane sat across from her, fingers steepled, nodding with the kind of academic empathy that sounded rehearsed even when sincere. I appreciate you coming forward, she said. But these things are complicated, Kendra. The university has layers. You have to be strategic. Kendra tried to keep her tone respectful. I've followed every rule. I didn't cut corners. They're trying to silence me for being too visible. Professor Crane exhaled slowly, then offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I know it feels that way, but pushing this right now, while the board is already reviewing your project, might create unnecessary tension. It could make them more defensive. So I should stay quiet? I'm saying, don't give them ammunition. Kendra felt the sting rise in her throat. But they already have the gun. Crane blinked. It's not about fairness, Kendra. It's about timing. Be patient. Let the process unfold. Stirring the pot now could cost you. Cost her the one already under review? Kendra left that meeting more hollow than angry. The woman who taught her how to name injustice had just asked her to ignore it for optics. Over the next week, she approached 3 more professors, all self-declared supporters of equity work. One redirected her to counseling services. Another thanked her for her emotional labor and said he would reflect deeply on what she shared. None offered to speak up. None offered to intervene. None even asked to see her code. Their allyship ended at the institution's doorstep. By Friday, Kendra stopped asking. The loneliness was sharper now. Not just isolation, but disillusionment. These weren't enemies. They were the people who wrote op-eds about Black struggle, who moderated panels about inclusive pedagogy, who wore safety pins on their coats after elections. But when the institution turned on a Black girl with proof in her hands, they retreated into silence, too polished to be called cowards, too complicit to be called allies. She returned to her room and stared at her walls. The emails, the code, the faculty silence. Her hands hovered over her laptop. She could leak everything. Upload the emails, the datasets, the metadata trails, go public. But her gut stopped her. Not yet. There was still something missing. A piece she hadn't uncovered. Something deeper than neglect. And then, on Monday morning, something changed. She was sitting alone at her usual spot in the lower level of Widener Library. Back to the wall, headphones in but no music playing, when someone slid into the chair across from her. It was Claire Pennington. Claire was a faculty assistant in the Department of Social Policy. Mid-20s, quiet, always watching but rarely speaking. Kendra had seen her at department talks, always holding a clipboard, always fading into the background. Claire didn't say anything at first, just slipped a manila folder across the table. The words confidential were stamped across the front. Kendra hesitated. What is this? Claire glanced over her shoulder. I didn't see it. I didn't print it. And I definitely didn't give it to you. Then she stood and walked away. Kendra stared at the folder for a full minute before opening it. Inside were internal memos, email printouts, meeting notes, all centered around a single topic, BiasNet, her project. But these weren't just review documents. They were communications between senior faculty, some from departments she'd never even interacted with. Discussions about her code, her background, her political tone. One note, handwritten and scanned, read, if we support this, it becomes precedent for every loud freshman with an identity agenda. Need to slow this down, or discredit it early. Another, typed from a senior official in the university's development office, stated, concerns raised by donor groups reap perception of Harvard endorsing anti-institutional narratives. Recommend distancing publicly, but monitor privately. There it was. Not just avoidance. Not just silence. Deliberate suppression. Kendra's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. One memo was marked with a red post-it. Watch for leaks. Control internal narrative. If she goes public, minimize. She closed the folder slowly, her breath shaking. This wasn't about her violating rules. This was about power. About Harvard protecting itself from a black freshman who built something too dangerous to dismiss, too powerful to own, and too loud to ignore. And all those allies who told her to wait, to stay quiet, to be careful, they'd already seen this folder. They'd known. A faculty assistant slips her a file marked confidential. The file burned in Kendra's hands long after she returned to her dorm. She kept her door locked, blinds drawn, laptop closed. The manila folder sat on her desk, untouched for hours. She stared at it like it might bite. Something in her gut told her, once she opened it fully, there was no going back. This wasn't just about her anymore. She had stumbled onto something older than her scholarship, older than BiasNet, something buried beneath Harvard's marble legacy, hidden behind its banners, trophies, and talk of progress. Finally, as dusk settled over Cambridge and the bell tower chimed 6 p.m., she opened the folder again. The pages were brittle photocopies. Some faded, others marked with heavy redactions. Some weren't even officially dated. Many were scans of handwritten memos or interdepartmental notices from decades ago. But the common theme ran clear as blood. Black brilliance flagged, questioned, contained. She flipped through the first set. 1978. Carlton J. Westbrook. Independent Mathematics Project. Exploring Chaos Theory Patterns in Economic Inequality. Denied departmental support. Later expelled for repeated disruptions in class debates. No formal record in graduation database. 1986. Patrice Lynn Ford. Developed a language-based machine learning framework in pre-AI era. Faculty review, labeled project incongruent with undergraduate expectations. Her project was later found mirrored in a white doctoral student's dissertation. 2 years later. No citation, no record. Patrice's name vanished from alumni index. 1994. Donovan Scott Banks. Algorithm mapping redlining patterns using cartographic regression. Application rejected by ethics board for overstepping institutional boundaries. Expelled weeks later for an unsubstantiated code of conduct violation. Faculty email noted, clever, but too volatile for our brand. Kendra's breath caught in her throat. These weren't isolated incidents. These were patterns. A cycle. Black students, who stepped beyond the expected limits, weren't mentored. They were erased. Their projects were not lost. They were taken. Sanitized. Published under safer names. She read on, stomach sinking with every page. A document titled Monitoring Notes. Risk flag. Listed names from various decades. Flagged by department heads as potential disruptors. The notes weren't based on behavior. They were based on ideas. Anyone whose innovation questioned systems, whether in housing, policing, education, was red flagged. And now her name was on that list. Freshly typed. Holloway Kendra L. 2025. Flagged. Independent AI Research Project. No advisor. Focus. Systemic racial bias modeling. Already attracting attention. Requires monitoring. She dropped the folder. Her skin tingled with nausea. This wasn't suspicion. This was surveillance. Harvard hadn't just failed students like her. It had studied them, preemptively labeled them, and removed them from the narrative before their brilliance could cause discomfort. And she wasn't the first. She may not even be the brightest. She returned to the file, more careful now. There were old yellowed pages tucked in the back, near illegible printouts of university faculty meeting notes from the 1950s and 60s. One entry was barely readable through the smudged ink and water stains. 1959. Dean C.R. Madison. Concerns over his academic leanings toward racial equity in admission modeling. Risk of internal destabilization. Project suggests predictive formula for equitable applicant scoring. Institutional threat. Removed from public duties. Later took indefinite leave. No further contact. Kendra stared at the name. Dean C.R. Madison. She knew that name. He was barely a whisper in Harvard's history. Mentioned once in an archival exhibit on lost leadership. Officially listed as having resigned voluntarily for personal reasons. But now here was something different. Evidence he'd been removed for the very thing she had just created. A predictive system meant to unmask racial bias in policy. Her fingers trembled as she searched his name on her laptop. Only one photo appeared. Black and white, grainy. Showing a stern, black man in horn-rimmed glasses, mid-sentence at a faculty meeting. No date of death listed. No academic legacy. Just a footnote. Madison wasn't remembered. He had been deleted. Just like the others. The truth hit her with cold clarity. Her work was not unique in its brilliance. It was unique in its survival. Somehow she had made it far enough to notice the trap, while others had walked into it blind. The folder's final document was a one-page memo, dated just 1 year before she arrived at Harvard. It was a strategic note between two senior faculty. Increased admissions from underrepresented groups will inevitably generate more exception cases. Our role is to guide, not amplify. Surveillance and early mentorship filters are key. Early mentorship filters. They weren't designed to uplift. They were designed to redirect, to soften, to contain. Kendra pushed back from her desk, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked around her tiny room, the peeling poster of W.E.B. Du Bois, the cramped bookshelf packed with used textbooks, the second-hand laptop. It all felt smaller now, not because she had failed, but because she had finally seen the full scale of the mountain she was climbing. And the walls weren't just high. They were engineered. She opened a blank document on her screen, titled it, The Silencing Algorithm. A historical record of suppressed black innovation at Harvard. It wouldn't just be about her anymore. She was going to name them. All of them. Build them into her code. Make their contributions live again. Through BiasNet. Restore the variables that had been deleted from the institutional equation. She was still breathing. She still had her voice. And she would use it. Then her inbox pinged. A new message. No subject. No name. Just a single sentence. You're asking too many questions, Miss Holloway. She stared at the screen, a chill sweeping over her. She hadn't sent the documents. She hadn't shared the folder. Her Wi-Fi had been encrypted. She'd used secure networks, hadn't she? She reopened her code files and froze. Someone had accessed her GitHub repo. A commit made 2 hours ago. But not by her. One name in the file matches a former dean, who vanished mysteriously. Kendra's room was darker than usual. The blinds were drawn shut. The desk lamp dimmed low. Her phone sat screen down beside her laptop, buzzing occasionally with notifications she no longer cared to check. The silence wasn't peace anymore, it was pressure. Each hour felt heavier, like the walls were learning how to breathe. She hadn't left her dorm in 2 days. Since the anonymous email arrived, and her GitHub showed unauthorized activity, she'd gone into defense mode, locking files, running security scans, encrypting her entire hard drive. Someone had tried to tamper with her code, and someone knew she was close to uncovering more. But silence was no longer strategy. It was suffocation. Every institutional door had closed on her. The diversity office had no capacity for one-on-one advocacy at this time. The ethics committee offered only a vague assurance that Harvard takes all claims seriously, and the professors who once promised her guidance now avoided eye contact in hallways. One even crossed the street to avoid walking past her. She realized then, waiting wasn't survival. It was surrender. So Kendra opened her laptop and opened a blank post window. She didn't type it as a student pleading for help. She wrote it as a witness giving testimony, not about just the algorithm, but about everything. The systematic rejection, the manipulation, the hidden files, the names redacted by power, the ideas stolen, the silence forced. She stripped away the polish, told the truth with the same clarity she gave her code. She included one screenshot, a visual output from BiasNet, a predictive chart showing how a proposed housing bill would disproportionately displace black families over 10 years. It was damning, data-backed, and undeniable. At the bottom of the post, she added one line. They tried to bury me. I built something they couldn't control, so they decided to erase me. My name is Kendra Holloway, and this is what I've built. She created a new anonymous handle on Twitter, @InvisibleEngineer. Then she clicked post. She stared at the screen for 5 minutes afterward. Nothing happened. And then, everything happened. It started with one like, then a retweet, then 10, then 100. Within the hour, Invisible Engineer was trending. First in Boston, then New York, then nationally. Black Twitter seized the story like oxygen to a flame. The post was shared by activists, academics, and celebrities within 6 hours. Writers called it the Rosa Parks of code. A popular influencer posted, "This black girl just built something the Ivy League tried to kill, not on our watch." By midnight, screenshots of her data were being dissected on Reddit. TikTok creators were dramatizing the thread. A viral video titled "Harvard's Secret War on Black Genius" hit 2 million views before morning. Kendra watched it all unfold in real time, from behind her screen, under her blanket, heart racing. And Harvard? Harvard scrambled. First came the subtle edit. The official website updated Kendra's bio, suddenly acknowledging her as a research assistant to a faculty member she'd never worked with. Then came the public statement. A cold, evasive paragraph about ongoing academic evaluations and commitment to equity. But it was too late. People had already picked a side. Alumni began releasing statements of support. Black professors from other universities posted open letters demanding an investigation. Influential tech figures, including a few from Silicon Valley, offered mentorship, resources, even funding. Anonymous sources from within Harvard began leaking more. Screenshots, Slack messages, whispers from closed-door meetings. And through it all, Kendra remained anonymous. But the phone calls started the next day. First it was a 212 number, then a 646, then blocked IDs. They didn't stop. CNN, NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Everyone wanted the story. Everyone wanted her. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The fear was real now. With every call, every DM, every headline, her world tilted further off balance. She was no longer just a student. She was a symbol, one that Harvard had failed to protect, and now couldn't contain. Even her classmates changed overnight. Some avoided her entirely. Others tried to cozy up, offering faux concern or sudden praise. One asked if she'd considered giving a TED Talk. Another said she was an inspiration, and should definitely monetize the moment. Kendra walked past them all in silence. But the tipping point came that evening. An email, not anonymous this time, from someone at The Atlantic. A journalist named Mariah Dean. Black, sharp, respectful. The subject line read, "Let's tell the whole story. Your way." Kendra hesitated, then opened it. "I've been following your thread. The algorithms, the faculty cover-up, the Madison file, all of it. I've spoken to former staff. I've read enough, but the world hasn't heard from you. Let me help you tell it. Not as gossip, but as history in motion. You are not the first, but maybe you can be the last to be ignored." Attached was a draft pitch for an article, the code they couldn't erase. Kendra sat frozen. Because for the first time, someone wasn't just asking what she'd built. They were asking why it needed to be hidden. Her phone buzzed again. CNN. Again. Then another ping. This time from someone she didn't expect. Dean Thorne. A short, direct message. "We need to talk. Urgently. Please respond." She stared at it. Then, another ping. A call from a restricted number. And this time, she picked up. "Hello?" she said, voice tight. A pause. Then a male voice. Older. Calm. "Ms. Holloway, this is Charles Madison. You don't know me, but I know who you are. And I need you to listen to me very carefully." Kendra's breath caught. "You're in danger." The system you've touched, it doesn't forgive. But I can help you finish what I started. The line went dead. National media outlets began calling Kendra's phone non-stop. 3 days after the viral post shattered the internet, Harvard finally broke its silence. Kendra saw it not through an email or internal bulletin, but via a news alert pushed to her phone like a cold slap to the face. Harvard University responds to allegations of AI suppression. She clicked the link with trembling fingers. The article featured a single statement: polished, diplomatic, and weaponized with intention. It didn't name her, not once, but every line felt aimed like a dart. Harvard University remains committed to fostering innovation across all communities. While we celebrate bold student inquiry, we also take academic protocols seriously. Recently, reports of unauthorized use of campus research resources have surfaced. In alignment with our academic integrity standards, we have initiated an internal review. We reaffirm our unwavering commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was it. 5 sentences. And everyone a lie dressed in polite language. Kendra read it again, slower this time, trying to feel what she was supposed to feel. Shame, maybe. Regret. But all she felt was fire. They had erased her with vocabulary, buried her behind institutional buzzwords. She wasn't a person anymore. She was unauthorized use. The last line was the cruelest. Our unwavering commitment to diversity. She slammed her laptop shut. Not out of frustration, out of disbelief. After all the panels, the DEI offices, the press-friendly sound bites, this was how they responded, by pretending they didn't know her name, while using her pain as a footnote to reinforce their image. Her phone buzzed again. Group chats, Twitter tags, friends texting. Did you see it? And this is foul. But the worst was from a former classmate in data ethics. A white girl, who'd once complimented Kendra's grit. They didn't even name you. That's how scared they are. Be proud. Be proud. Kendra stared at the message. Hollow. This wasn't pride. It was exposure. She hadn't wanted fame. She'd wanted freedom. Room to breathe. A desk where she didn't have to look over her shoulder. A lab that didn't see her as a trespasser. No, she was a headline, and still invisible. The online world erupted again, but this time, in fury. Alumni started tweeting, "If you're so committed to inclusion, name her." Professors from other universities posted, "If the work was unoriginal or unethical, why the anonymity?" A Harvard graduate with a huge following called the statement diversity washing, and a former faculty member publicly broke rank. Harvard's silence is strategic. It's easier to kill a name than to admit a failure. The tide had turned, but the institution wasn't letting go. The next day, the same Harvard faculty who had ignored Kendra began releasing their own statements. Not to defend her, but to distance themselves. One professor tweeted, "This is a painful reminder that process matters. Passion is important, but so is protocol." Another wrote a Medium piece titled, "Why Academic Standards Must Remain Intact, Even When It's Hard." Not a single one of them reached out to Kendra. And then came the edits. Her name disappeared from the university's mentorship portal. The email chain she'd kept with Professor Denning. Deleted. Her name was quietly removed from a student feature blog, where she'd once been praised as a rising star in AI ethics. She had become a ghost at the very place that once accepted her photo for a recruitment brochure. Kendra sat in the dark that night, staring at her screen. Her project was still safe, thanks to backups and encryption. But her name, her presence, it was being scrubbed in real time. And that's when her inbox lit up, with a new message. Subject: feature request, full investigative piece. Sender: Harper Steele@nytimes.com. Her heart stopped. Harper Steele was a senior investigative journalist for the New York Times, known for exposés on institutional abuse, a Pulitzer finalist. The email read, "Ms. Holloway, I've been following the events surrounding your research and the university's response. I have no interest in turning you into a spectacle, but I do believe your story reflects a deeper, long-standing pattern, one the public deserves to understand. I'd like to meet off record to start. You decide how much gets told." Kendra read the message 3 times. It didn't feel like an opportunity. It felt like a line in the sand. She could step back, let the fire burn out, protect what was left of her quiet, or she could walk straight into it, with her truth sharpened into something unignorable. She stared at her screen. Everything inside her pulsed with the memory of the folder, the erased names, the project data, Dean Madison. She clicked reply. A journalist from the New York Times contacts Kendra for an exposé. The morning after Kendra replied to the New York Times, her inbox looked different. The usual flood of supportive DMs, article links, and screenshots from her allies was still there, but now they were joined by something else. Something colder, a string of anonymous messages. Careful who you trust. We know where your sister goes to school. Keep pushing, and you'll lose more than your credits. No names, no profile pictures, just words wrapped in venom. At first she tried to ignore them. She blocked the senders. She told herself it was just internet noise, bots, trolls, cowards behind keyboards. But the messages kept coming. Every few hours, different addresses, different phrasing, the same message. You're being watched. That night, as she walked back from the library, she noticed a figure standing across the courtyard near the engineering building. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her. When she glanced again, he was gone. She didn't sleep. By morning, another message arrived. This time, it wasn't anonymous. Subject change in scholarship status. Immediate attention required. It came from the Office of Financial Aid, Harvard's most impersonal bureaucracy. The message was only 3 lines. Due to ongoing administrative reviews, your current scholarship package is now under reconsideration pending investigation. You are advised not to make external media appearances until the matter is resolved. Kendra sat frozen at her desk, her fingers trembling above the keyboard. They were threatening to strip her future, and they weren't even pretending anymore. She rushed to the financial aid office, heart pounding, clutching every piece of documentation she had ever submitted. Transcripts, letters, even emails of commendation from the early days of her admission. But the woman behind the counter barely looked up from her monitor. Your file's in review, she said. I can't speak on pending evaluations. I haven't violated any scholarship terms, Kendra said, voice sharp but composed. I'm not authorized to comment. Then who is? The woman tapped the nameplate of a senior administrator, currently out of office until further notice. Kendra left the building with her vision blurry. Not from tears, from fury. It wasn't just that they were trying to silence her. They were trying to erase her methodically, one institutionally polite step at a time. That same afternoon, she was stopped in the hallway by a professor she barely knew, Dr. Vogel, a visiting lecturer from the business school. Miss Holloway, he said, voice low, eyes darting to make sure no one else was near. A word of advice. She waited. Don't trust the archive systems. And if I were you, I'd download everything before the week is over. Records disappear here when they need to. What records? She asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Grades, project submissions, attendance logs, internal evaluations. He paused. I've seen it happen before. Quietly. Efficiently. He walked away before she could ask more. Kendra's hands were sweating when she got back to her room. She logged into her academic portal. Everything looked fine, for now. But she didn't wait. She downloaded her entire transcript, every course evaluation, every email chain involving professors, and every time-stamped version of her BiasNet code from the university servers. She encrypted them, made backups, printed physical copies, and stored them in her locked drawer. By now her viral fame had cooled slightly, but its consequences had only sharpened. Journalists were still requesting interviews, but more cautiously. Friends who had posted about her story stopped tagging her directly. Her once chatty group chats had gone quiet. Even faculty who had once called her brilliant were silent now. She was radioactive, and Harvard was playing the long game. Then, late one evening, a knock on her dorm room door. She hesitated before opening. It was Dr. Marcus Elgin, tenured, black, respected, a political science professor known for his groundbreaking work on systemic disenfranchisement. She had never taken his class, but his writings had been cited in her own project notes. He stepped inside with the kind of quiet that felt practiced. I've been watching, he said. Kendra sat on the edge of her bed, wary. Everyone's watching now. He gave a slight nod. But most are watching from behind glass. I'm not. She didn't respond. I know what they're doing to you, he said. I've seen it before. Different student. Different decade. Same system. Her shoulders dropped slightly. He wasn't telling her anything new, but he was naming it. Out loud. They'll keep pushing, he continued, until you break, or disappear. Then why come now? Because you've done something they can't ignore, he said. And because I might be able to help you survive it. She looked up. How? He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin flash drive, set it on her desk. Proof. From another era. Records. Memos. Correspondence. All from when Madison disappeared. I've been holding onto it for years, waiting for someone who could do something with it. Her heart jumped. You believed him? I knew him. He mentored me. Quietly. Off record. Just like I'm offering to do for you. She stared at the flash drive. What's the catch? He paused. The air shifted. You go quiet, he said. Her face froze. You keep building, but you stop posting. Stop leaking. Stop confronting. I'll protect you. Get your scholarship reinstated. Get you a funded mentorship. Even tenure track one day. But it has to be quiet. Kendra stared at him, disbelief crawling across her face. You're asking me to hide. I'm asking you to survive. His tone softened. You can't change Harvard if you don't graduate from it. She felt her throat tighten. That sounds like something they'd say. I'm not them, he said. I'm what happens when you learn to outlast them. The room was silent, except for the hum of her laptop screen. Her eyes shifted from the flash drive to the floor, then back to him. This was it. The lifeline. But it came with a leash. A tenured black professor offers to mentor her, but under one shocking condition. Kendra stared at the flash drive for a long time, after Dr. Elgin left. It sat on her desk like a loaded question. Proof of everything she already knew, and yet something deeper. A weapon she could wield, if she agreed to the one condition he'd quietly wrapped it in. Submission. She replayed his words in her mind. I'll protect you. You'll graduate. You just have to stop fighting out loud. The way he said it gently, even fatherly, made it sound like kindness. But kindness without justice was something else. Something quieter. Something more dangerous. It was complicity pretending to be care. At midnight, she clicked open a secure text file and began typing. Option 1. Accept Dr. Elgin's deal. Keep access. Maintain scholarship. Fade controversy. Graduate safely. Then she added a second line. Option 2. Refuse. Fight publicly. Risk scholarship. Risk graduation. Possibly lose everything. She stared at the blinking cursor beneath that second line. The cost was real. Not metaphorical. Not theoretical. Actual. And it wouldn't just fall on her shoulders. It would ripple outward. Her mother, her younger sister, their hopes and sacrifices, all depending on her not just being at Harvard, but staying. That was the trap, wasn't it? This wasn't about proving she was smart enough to belong. It was about surviving the price of not disappearing. The next morning, she met Dr. Elgin at a coffee shop just off campus. He chose a seat in the back, away from the windows. When she arrived, he didn't offer a smile, just a steady, knowing look. He spoke first. I take it you've thought about the offer. I have, she replied. He sipped his coffee, waiting. And I have a question, she said, voice quiet but pointed. If this were about any other student, if a white male student had done what I did, would you still ask them to stay silent to survive? Elgin didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. No, he admitted, because they wouldn't need protection. The system's already built for them to trip and still land on a cushion. She nodded. So you're asking me to play by rules that weren't built for me, to survive a game I didn't agree to play. He leaned in. I'm asking you to stay alive long enough to change the rules later. From inside. And what about the others? She asked. The names in the file, Madison, Patrice, Carlton. They stayed quiet or they were silenced. None of them got to come back and rewrite the rules. Elgin exhaled, the weight of history etched into his face. I know. Silence settled between them. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a pre-drafted statement. I deeply regret any procedural misunderstandings that may have occurred during the development of my project. While I worked passionately on BiasNet, it was part of a collaborative academic environment. I now recognize the importance of proper oversight and peer engagement in innovative research. I'm grateful to Harvard for its continued guidance. At the bottom, there was space for her signature. It was clean, legal, sanitized, and entirely false. She closed the folder. What happens if I refuse? She asked. He looked her dead in the eyes. Then I can't protect you, and neither can anyone else. She left the coffee shop with no goodbye. By the time she returned to campus, the weight of the decision had fully settled in her chest. This was the cost of being right, while black, of being excellent without permission. The world would praise her talent if she stayed quiet. It would burn her alive if she didn't. That night she sat on the floor of her room, surrounded by scattered printouts, documents from Madison's case, redacted memos, screenshots of her deleted records. She read them one by one, remembering the faces, the pattern. The way institutions didn't break you loudly, they broke you quietly, in small deniable pieces. She opened her laptop, created a new calendar event. Title: BiasNet, a public demonstration of algorithmic injustice. Date: Friday, 7 p.m. Location: Main Faculty Auditorium. Description: an open presentation of independent student research addressing systemic bias through predictive AI. All students, faculty, staff, and media welcome. She hit send to the entire university listserv. No advisor, no approval, no permission. It was an act of rebellion disguised as a calendar invite. Within minutes the replies started. Some were curious, some were confused. Some warned her not to go through with it. One email came from a staff member in the IT department. "You realize they'll shut it down before you finish." To which she replied, "Then they'll have to do it publicly." The stakes had shifted. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about refusing to disappear. She announces a public presentation of her project, open to the entire faculty. Friday night arrived like a storm. No one could stop. The auditorium lights glared bright above polished wood floors and towering arched windows. The room, usually reserved for visiting dignitaries and keynote lectures, now belonged to a girl the university had tried to silence. Rows of seats filled fast. Students, journalists, low-level administrators, a few curious faculty. Most came expecting spectacle. Some came out of guilt. A handful came to watch her fall. Kendra stood backstage behind the curtain, heart pounding with a force that made her hands tremble. She wore all black, not in mourning but in clarity. No logos, no department tags, no symbols but her own name. Beside her laptop on the podium sat a folder with printed proof. The deleted funding emails, the flagged memos, the redacted student profiles from decades past. None of it was part of her presentation, but she brought it anyway, just in case. A soft chime echoed through the space as the room quieted. A voice over the PA announced, "Presenting Kendra Holloway, undergraduate researcher, Department of Data Science. Topic: BiasNet, predictive modeling of systemic injustice." Polite applause followed. Polite, not excited. She stepped out. The lights were hot, the room colder. Her eyes quickly scanned the crowd. Front row, Dean Thorne, stone-faced. Several tenured professors she recognized, including Dr. Crane, whose email about waiting it out she hadn't forgotten. Further back, students leaned forward, phones discreetly recording. A few journalists sat on the side rows, notebooks open, pens ready. She took a breath. "Good evening," she began. Her voice cracked slightly. She didn't apologize. "I'm Kendra Holloway, and tonight I want to show you something I've spent the last 3 years building. BiasNet isn't just code. It's a mirror. It reflects systems you think are neutral, and shows what they really are." She clicked the first slide. The projector glowed behind her. Clean visuals, simple design, no theatrics, just data. This algorithm analyzes 10 years of policy implementation data across housing, criminal justice, and education. It doesn't use race as a filter. It reveals how race becomes the outcome, even when it isn't the input. Some eyebrows raised. She continued, "What you're going to see tonight isn't hypothetical. It's not theory. It's prediction built from behavior, from the system itself." The next slide appeared. A map of Boston, color-coded in real time as BiasNet processed housing policy data. The heat map pulsed across neighborhoods. This simulation models the proposed zoning ordinance, HR 19-4. The policy on paper is about development and safety. But watch what happens when it's run through the algorithm. She pressed a key. The map responded, pushing red into historically black neighborhoods, signaling displacement within 5 years. Rent hikes, mortgage denials, disproportionate code enforcement. Whispers echoed through the room. "The model doesn't just show results," Kendra added. "It shows intent, or at the very least, the consistent impact of design that pretends to be neutral." A hand shot up. "Professor Wallace, computer science. How can you ensure the algorithm isn't biased itself?" "Predictive models are only as ethical as the data you feed them." Kendra nodded. "Great question. The model was trained on public federal and state records, all time-stamped and verified. More importantly, it doesn't predict individuals. It predicts structural impact. She switched to a visual overlay of eviction rates versus zoning changes from the past decade. The alignment was razor sharp. In neighborhood after neighborhood, policies that claimed to improve infrastructure coincided with sudden surges in eviction and racial displacement. Another hand, Dr. Klein. This is ambitious. But where's the peer validation? Who's reviewed this with you? Kendra's mouth went tight. No one. Because every time I asked for mentorship, I was redirected, ignored, or told it was too advanced. Silent. She let it sit. Then continued. But I'm not here to make anyone comfortable. I'm here because you teach data ethics but fund the erasure of black data. You push for diversity in admissions, but strip support once students arrive. You speak of inclusion while building systems that reward silence and punish independence. A ripple moved through the audience. Her next slide showed the faculty email denying her funding. We quietly pass. Don't want to encourage the wrong precedent. Gasps. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. She turned back to the crowd. I'm not the first. You erased the others. Carlton Westbrook, Patrice Ford, Dean Madison. Brilliant minds whose records barely exist today because they made the mistake of building what you weren't ready to see. She paused, clicked her final slide. It displayed one line of code. BiasNet's command for policy simulation. This isn't just an algorithm. It's a record, a resurrection, and from tonight forward, it's public. Murmurs swept through the room. Dean Thorne stood.
Ms. Holloway, do you understand what you're proposing? Publishing unreviewed institutional data with predictive outcomes could invite legal consequences. This isn't responsible research.
Kendra looked him squarely in the eye. Neither is hiding it. Silence. The kind that comes not from absence, but from impact. Then from the far right row, a voice rose. Miss Holloway. All heads turned. It was Dr. Janice Harrow, tenured faculty, head of the AI Ethics Council. She hadn't said a word all evening. She stood slowly. I would like to formally request that this project be submitted for national academic review. A wave of shock rolled through the room. Gasps. Whispers. One professor visibly recoiled. Another quickly typed something into their phone. Kendra blinked. Dr. Harrow stepped forward. This model is extraordinary. It challenges not only our systems, but our silence. I believe it should be reviewed by scholars across the country. It belongs in the national conversation. Dean Thorne's jaw clenched. Several faculty members whispered behind cupped hands. Kendra steadied herself. She had braced for rejection, for disapproval, even threats. But not this. Not a call to amplify. To elevate. Her breath caught, not in relief, but in resolve. Because she knew what came next. A faculty member stands and demands the project be submitted for national review. In the days that followed her presentation, Kendra Holloway's name lit up across the country like a fuse that had finally reached the end of its wire. Clips from the auditorium exploded online. A video of her saying this isn't just an algorithm, it's a record, racked up over 10 million views in 3 days. National anchors debated her work live on primetime. Panelists on cable networks argued about activist technology, while tech journals dissected her code like it was scripture. Some called her a visionary, others a radical. But no one could ignore her anymore. BiasNet was no longer just a student project. It was a disruption. And it had come from a black girl the Ivy League tried to erase. Congressional staffers requested access to the codebase. Advocacy groups lobbied for its use in legislation. Even the Department of Housing and Urban Development reached out, asking for collaboration. The model was accurate, undeniable, and deeply inconvenient for anyone who profited from pretending race had nothing to do with policy. Silicon Valley came next. First, it was a VP at a major AI firm, sliding into her inbox with a 6-figure offer to explore potential scaling. Then came another message, from a billionaire venture capitalist offering her seed funding to take BiasNet to the next level. Tech media breathlessly wrote profiles with headlines like "The Algorithm That Might End Redlining" and "The Student Who Dared to Code Truth." She received over 200 offers in a single week. And Harvard pivoted. The very institution that had investigated her for misconduct now claimed her as a success story. The university's homepage updated overnight. Harvard students' work sparks national innovation in AI and ethics. Her name, once scrubbed from the site, was suddenly everywhere. A press release praised her as a testament to Harvard's commitment to bold interdisciplinary research. The same administrators who had ignored her emails now called her an example of intellectual bravery. They quoted her, but only the safest lines. They lauded her, but never mentioned the scholarship review, the blocked funding, the threats or the silence. At a university town hall, Dean Thorne even said, "It's clear now that Ms. Holloway represents the kind of critical inquiry we hope all students embody." The crowd applauded. Kendra watched the live stream in disbelief. They weren't celebrating her. They were co-opting her, not for what she built, but for what her name could fix. She became their redemption arc, a black girl they could point to as evidence that the system worked. If only you fought hard enough. But no one asked why she had to fight at all. Behind closed doors, she kept getting the same invitation. Join their labs. Partner with the Center for Innovation. Accept an honorary position. Be part of the machine that once tried to grind her down. Even Dr. Elgin, who had once offered her silence as protection, now emailed her with congratulations. "I'm glad you found a path forward. Let me know how I can support your transition into the institutional framework." Kendra didn't reply, because something inside her had changed. She had seen the machine, and she had beaten it. But joining it? That was something else entirely. Late one night, she sat in her room, scrolling through the offers. Contracts, grants, lab access, and felt the same tightness in her chest that she had felt before any of this began. That feeling of being surrounded by doors, but none of them leading where she needed to go. Each offer came with a condition. Don't say too much. Don't implicate the school. Keep the story inspirational, not institutional. She closed her laptop. She thought of Madison, Patrice, Carlton, all the names buried in files, whose work had vanished because they had no stage to stand on, no one to pass their torch to. And she realized something. Her story wasn't just about being seen. It was about creating space, so others wouldn't have to disappear to be brilliant. The next day, she made a post. "I'm grateful for the attention, but I didn't build BiasNet to be absorbed into the same systems it exposes. I'm not for sale. I'm not here to be used as proof that the machine works. I'm building something of my own, where marginalized youth can learn, code, and challenge the world without asking for permission first." Attached was a flyer. The Holloway Lab, Public Tech, Private Truths, powered by us, launching in Atlanta. Applications open soon. No funding from Harvard. No seal of approval from Silicon Valley. Just her. And a new generation waiting to be seen. The media called it a bold departure. Tech blogs debated whether she was walking away from opportunity or creating a new one. But in the neighborhood she came from, the message was clear. She wasn't leaving power. She was reclaiming it. Kendra declines all offers and starts her own public tech lab for marginalized youth. The morning it broke, Kendra wasn't even looking at the news. She was standing in a former rec center on Atlanta's south side, surrounded by chipped paint, old power outlets, and 23 laptops she'd purchased with a crowdfunding campaign that hit 6 figures in under a week. This was where the Holloway Lab would live, raw, unpolished, but pulsing with the kind of energy that couldn't be simulated in Ivy League glass buildings. Then her phone buzzed. Again, and again. By the 5th notification she checked. CNN breaking. Federal civil rights investigation opened into Harvard's handling of AI suppression case. Her hands tightened around the phone. The story had finally turned. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights had officially launched an inquiry into Harvard's internal review practices, citing discriminatory patterns in mentorship, funding, and academic integrity protocols. The complaint had been signed by not one, but 5 former faculty members, all of whom had worked at Harvard within the past 15 years. Anonymous no longer. They were naming names, and Kendra's story was at the center. Across social media, screenshots from the redacted files she had never shared began to surface, posted not by her but by whistleblowers. Internal memos, archived meeting minutes, a buried faculty recommendation, calling her a risk to departmental cohesion. A now infamous quote from an email, "Better to isolate than elevate." It all spilled. One former administrator published an op-ed in The Atlantic, writing, "Kendra Holloway didn't just build a machine, she exposed one." Lawsuits followed. Several alumni joined a class action lawsuit alleging racial discrimination in project funding and mentorship across multiple departments. The lawsuit unearthed another layer of corruption. Student applications deliberately flagged for delayed processing based on perceived activist leanings. Harvard tried to respond, but every press release felt hollow. Generic. Legal. No one was listening to their language anymore. And through it all, Kendra stayed mostly silent. She didn't give interviews. She didn't retweet headlines. She didn't post anything other than construction updates on the lab, quotes from students, and photos of young black girls learning to write their first lines of code. Because while Harvard spiraled, she had work to do. 1 week into the